Of all the ways humanity expected first contact to happen, nobody predicted it would occur during the heavyweight championship bout at UFC 847. The ship materialized right above the octagon in Las Vegas, interrupting what commentators were calling the most anticipated rematch in combat sports history. To be fair, the aliens had been monitoring Earth's broadcasts for months, trying to make sense of our civilization. But their linguistic algorithms had trouble distinguishing between reality and entertainment, leading to some rather unfortunate conclusions. They became convinced that the UFC was Earth's primary governing body, with Dana White XXIII serving as our planet's supreme leader. The delegation of 7-foot-tall, iridescent beings chose their moment carefully, wanting to address Earth's leadership during what they assumed was a ritual combat ceremony to determine planetary policy. Their timing couldn't have been worse or better, depending on how you look at it. Jake Murphy was having a terrible night even before the aliens showed up. As the UFC's head of public relations, he'd spent the last hour dealing with a fighter who'd missed weight by claiming his gravity-specific training regimen had been disrupted by a solar flare. Now he was watching an alien spacecraft the size of a small office building hover over his carefully planned pay-per-view event. "Your combat ritual intrigues us," Earth beings announced the lead alien through some sort of translator device. Their voice boomed through the arena's speaker system, causing feedback that made everyone wince. "We wish to understand why you determine leadership through physical violence." Jake, who'd earned the nickname the Snake Oil Salesman for his ability to spin any PR disaster into gold, stepped forward before anyone else could respond. "Oh no, you've got it all wrong," he said, forcing his most charming smile. "This isn't a leadership ritual. It's entertainment. You know, fun." The aliens' collective confusion manifested as a shimmer that rippled through their translucent bodies. "You engage in organized combat. For amusement." "Well, yeah," Jake shrugged. "Don't you guys have sports where you're from?" "We have competitions of intellectual prowess and artistic merit," replied the alien leader, who introduced themselves as Ambassador Glykes. "But none involve intentionally striking other sentient beings for the pleasure of observers." The two fighters in the octagon, who'd been frozen in mid-clinch since the spacecraft appeared, slowly separated and looked up at the aliens. The challenger, covered in tattoos and sporting a magnificent mullet, raised his hand like a school kid. "So you're telling me nobody in the entire galaxy throws hands for fun?" "Throws hands." The alien's translation matrix seemed to struggle with that one. Jake saw his chance and took it. Years of selling fight narratives to the media had prepared him for this moment. "Ambassador, what you're witnessing isn't just violence, it's the culmination of human athletic achievement, strategic thinking, and the celebration of controlled competition. These athletes train their entire lives to test themselves against worthy opponents. But why not test mathematics skills, or ability to solve quantum equations? Because sometimes," Jake said, warming to his subject, "the best way to understand someone is to fight them. There's a pure honesty in combat sports that you can't find anywhere else." The aliens conferred among themselves, their bodies pulsing with various colors that Jake assumed represented different emotions. Finally, Ambassador Glykes spoke again. "We request formal documentation of this phenomenon. The Galactic Council will want to understand why Earth is the only known world to develop such practices." And that's how Jake the Snake Oil Salesman Murphy became Earth's first interstellar sports ambassador. Though, to be honest, he would have preferred it happen during a less expensive pay-per-view event. The refund requests alone were going to be a nightmare. So Jake said, pulling out his phone and already drafting a press release in his head, "Who wants to explain weight classes to the nice aliens?" 3 days after the UFC incident, Jake found himself standing before the Galactic Council's Emergency Committee for Unusual Planetary Behaviors. The committee consisted of representatives from 47 different civilizations, none of whom seemed to grasp the concept of a perfectly normal sporting event. "Let me get this straight," said Councillor Vrax, a floating cloud of gas contained within what looked like a designer snow globe. "You humans intentionally created multiple systems of regulated violence, complete with rankings, weight divisions, and something called pay-per-view." Jake adjusted his tie, wondering if he should have worn something more diplomatic than his lucky UFC 800 promotional blazer. "That's correct, though I prefer the term combat sports to regulated violence. It sounds better in the media reports." A holographic display activated in the center of the chamber, showing highlights from various fighting disciplines throughout human history. Boxing, wrestling, martial arts, and even medieval jousting flickered before the bewildered alien audience. Fascinating, muttered Dr. Plix, the council's chief xenoanthropologist. The small, purple creature resembled a cross between a squid and a graduate student who'd had too much coffee. And these activities serve no practical purpose? No determination of tribal leadership? No ritual significance? Well, Jake began, slipping into his familiar PR mode, they actually serve multiple purposes. Physical fitness, self-defense training, character building, entertainment. Entertainment, interrupted a crystalline being from the third row. You keep using that word. Do you mean to tell us that humans pay money to watch other humans engage in physical combat? Sometimes quite a lot of money, Jake confirmed. Especially if there's a good storyline behind the fight. This caused such an uproar that the council had to call a brief recess. Jake used the break to check his phone. 17 missed calls from Dana White XXIII and one very confused text from the fighter whose gravity training excuse now seemed surprisingly legitimate. When the session resumed, Dr. Plix had composed herself enough to ask follow-up questions. Our research shows that humans also simulate combat in virtual environments, create dramatic reenactments of historic battles, and even argue about hypothetical fight scenarios between fictional characters. How do you explain this cultural obsession? Jake thought about all the late-night debates he'd had about whether a medieval knight could beat a ninja. Look, sometimes you just need to know who would win in a fair fight. It's human nature. But it's not nature at all, exclaimed Ambassador Gleix, who had joined the council for this session. We've studied millions of species across thousands of worlds. None have developed organized combat as entertainment. They pronounce the word like it might bite them. Maybe that's your problem, Jake suggested. You're all so focused on being civilized that you've forgotten how to have fun. When was the last time any of you got into a friendly sparring match? The silence that followed was deafening. Then, from the back of the chamber, came a voice that would change galactic history. I would like to try this. Sparring. All heads turned to see ZKRT, a junior diplomatic aide from a species of crystalline beings, standing awkwardly. For research purposes, of course. Jake grinned. If there was one thing he'd learned in PR, it was to recognize an opportunity when it presented itself. Tell you what, why don't we set up a little demonstration? Show you folks what real combat sports are all about. The council erupted into chaos again. Half the members were adamantly opposed to the idea, while the other half were already asking about weight classes and whether their natural defense mechanisms would be considered illegal moves. Order, shouted Councillor Vrax, their gas form turning a deep shade of what Jake assumed was the color of authority. Perhaps a controlled experiment would help us understand this peculiar human practice. And that's how Jake found himself organizing the first ever interspecies martial arts tournament. Though he had to admit, figuring out weight classes for beings that could alter their mass at will was going to be an interesting challenge. Just wait until I tell them about weight cutting, he muttered to himself as the council chambers emptied. That'll really blow their minds. Setting up the first intergalactic martial arts tournament turned out to be exactly as complicated as you'd expect. Jake spent 3 weeks just trying to create a rulebook that would accommodate beings from across the known universe. The liability waiver alone ran to 78 pages, with 16 different appendices covering spontaneous molecular dissolution. No, absolutely not, Jake said, reviewing the latest applicant. I don't care if you can reconstitute yourself afterward. Deliberately exploding during a match is against the spirit of combat sports. ZKRT, who had somehow become Jake's unofficial assistant, made a note on their crystalline tablet. What about controlled plasma emissions? Only if they're equivalent to human striking force. We're trying to establish fair competition here, not recreate the Big Bang. The training center they'd established on Neutral Station Alpha looked more like a mad scientist's laboratory than a gym. Different atmospheric chambers lined the walls, each containing species-specific equipment. In one corner, a group of energy beings practiced what looked like Tai Chi while floating in their containment fields. Near the entrance, a silicon-based lifeform was carefully learning to pull its punches so it wouldn't shatter its sparring partners. The good news, Jake announced during one of their daily staff meetings, is that we finally figured out weight classes for non-corporeal beings. The bad news is that the quantum weight division keeps disappearing into alternate dimensions during their matches. But despite the challenges, something remarkable was happening. Species that had never understood the concept of recreational combat were discovering the unique joy of testing themselves against worthy opponents. Even the most skeptical council members had to admit that the program was yielding unexpected benefits. Then came the day of the first official matches. Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all dimensional classifications, Jake's voice boomed through the station's communication system. Welcome to the inaugural Universal Fighting Championship. The viewing chambers were packed with representatives from across the galaxy. Each section was specially modified to accommodate different atmospheric requirements, gravity preferences, and states of matter. Jake had even hired a team of quantum translators to provide real-time commentary in 412 different languages. The first match was between a human kickboxer and a graceful, six-armed being from the Cygnus sector. They had similar mass and had trained together for weeks to ensure a fair contest. The bout started cautiously, both fighters testing each other's defenses. Remember, Jake muttered from his position at ringside, no telepathy, no phase shifting, and absolutely no spontaneous evolution during the match. What followed was either the most beautiful or most ridiculous display in sporting history, depending on your perspective. The human's traditional kickboxing techniques against the alien's fluid, multi-limbed style created a combat dance that had the audience mesmerized. When the human fighter won by decision after 3 rounds, she and her opponent exchanged respectful bows, all 7 arms between them moving in perfect synchronization. Now that Jake said to the nearest council observer, is what we call good sportsmanship. But not every match went so smoothly. The bout between 2 energy beings had to be called off when their competitive spirit got the better of them, resulting in what scientists would later classify as a minor fusion event. The heavyweight division faced a crisis when one competitor achieved enlightenment mid-match and transcended their physical form. Minor setbacks, Jake assured the increasingly nervous council representatives. All part of the learning process. The real breakthrough came during an exhibition match between ZKRT and a human Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioner. The crystalline diplomat had taken to grappling with surprising enthusiasm, though their early training sessions had resulted in several shattered practice mats. Watch this, Jake told the audience as the match began. They've been practicing for weeks. What followed was a masterclass in adaptive martial arts. The human fighter had modified traditional BJ techniques to work against ZKRT's crystalline form, while ZKRT had learned to use their natural lattice structure in ways that complemented rather than contradicted the sport's principles. When ZKRT secured a submission victory with a perfectly executed armbar, a technique that shouldn't have even been possible for their species, the viewing chambers erupted in cheers, whistles, and various species-appropriate expressions of appreciation. Finally, Jake said, watching the 2 competitors congratulate each other, they're starting to get it. Dr. Plix, who had been documenting everything for the council's archives, floated over to Jake's position. Get what exactly? That combat sports aren't just about fighting, Jake explained. They're about respect, adaptation, and the universal language of friendly competition. Also pay-per-view revenue, but let's focus on the noble stuff for now. As if to prove his point, the next bout was already underway, a tag team match between 4 beings who, according to all known xenobiology, should never have been able to cooperate in any meaningful way. Yet there they were, demonstrating techniques they'd developed together, competing with passion while carefully observing the safety rules. I believe, said Dr. Plix, her tentacles wiggling with academic excitement, we may need to revise our understanding of both combat and sports. Jake just smiled, already planning the marketing campaign for their next event. Wait until I tell you about my idea for an interspecies wrestling league. The real breakthrough in interspecies combat sports didn't come from a championship match or a spectacular knockout. It happened during what was supposed to be a routine training session, 3 months into the program. A human Muay Thai fighter was showing a group of gelatinous beings how to properly throw an elbow strike when one of them suddenly began vibrating at a frequency that their translator identified as profound emotional realization. I understand now, the alien announced, their translucent form rippling with excitement. The strike is not about damage, it's about proving to yourself that you can do it. Jake, who had been dealing with an insurance claim about a telepathic weight-cutting incident, looked up from his paperwork. "Could you repeat that?" "When we first observed human combat sports, we thought it was simply ritualized violence," the alien continued, still vibrating. "But it's actually a form of communication, isn't it? Every punch, every kick, every submission attempt, they're all ways of expressing oneself." The human fighter grinned. "Now you're getting it. Want to try some pad work?" Word of this revelation spread through the training center faster than a quantum particle with a deadline. Soon, beings from across the galaxy were approaching combat sports with a completely new perspective. It wasn't just about winning or losing anymore, it was about the universal language of controlled conflict. Dr. Plix's research team documented everything, producing papers with titles like The Metaphysical Implications of the Superman Punch and Quantum Entanglement in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, a case study. The most fascinating aspect, Dr. Plix explained during one of her presentations, is how combat sports serve as a bridge between different species' understanding of physical interaction. A being made of pure energy and a silicon-based life form might not be able to share a meal together, but they can certainly share a training session. Jake watched as more and more aliens began to embrace the spirit of martial arts. Meditation sessions now included beings from 15 different dimensional planes. The concept of belt rankings had been adapted for species that didn't wear clothes, using everything from energy frequencies to crystalline colorations to denote skill levels. Even the Galactic Council's most stubborn members had to admit that something remarkable was happening. Species with histories of diplomatic tension were suddenly requesting joint training camps. Traditional rivals were settling their differences in supervised sparring matches rather than bureaucratic battles. "You know what the best part is," Jake said to ZKRT during one of their now regular strategy sessions. "Nobody's trying to prove they're better than anyone else anymore. They're all just trying to be better than they were yesterday." ZKRT, whose crystalline form now bore the equivalent of a purple belt in 3 different martial arts, nodded in agreement. The Council has noted a 47% decrease in interspecies conflicts since the introduction of combat sports programs, though we're still trying to explain to some members that a flying armbar is not an appropriate response to a trade dispute. The training center had become something more than just a gym. It was a laboratory for cross-species understanding, a diplomatic hub where traditional barriers broke down as quickly as mental blocks against learning new techniques. One particularly memorable moment came when a species of hyper-intelligent cloud formations, who had initially dismissed physical combat as primitive, discovered the strategic complexity of wrestling. Their ability to analyze and adapt to different grappling styles led to the development of entirely new techniques that even human coaches had never considered. "It's like watching a chess match," commented one observer, "if chess pieces could execute perfect double-leg takedowns." The highlight reels from training sessions and friendly matches became popular viewing across the galaxy. Beings who had never understood the appeal of combat sports found themselves drawn into the narratives of personal growth and achievement. "We had it backward," admitted Ambassador Glex during a ceremonial belt promotion. "We thought Earth was primitive for developing combat sports. Now we realize you were pioneers in understanding something fundamental about sentient beings. Sometimes you just need to punch things to reach a deeper truth." Jake, watching a group of newly graduated instructors demonstrate techniques to their first students, couldn't help but smile. Maybe that should be our new slogan: Universal Fighting Championship, reaching peace through controlled violence. "That's terrible marketing," ZKRT observed. "Yeah, but it's kind of true, isn't it?" Around them, the training center hummed with activity. A quantum being was helping a silicon-based fighter perfect their spinning back kick. A collective consciousness was learning the finer points of wrist locks. In the corner, Dr. Plix's research team was documenting what they called the first recorded instance of a telepathic triangle choke. Humanity's peculiar obsession with combat sports had somehow turned into the galaxy's newest path to understanding. And somewhere in the universe, a fighter was beginning their journey, stepping onto the mats for the first time, about to learn that sometimes the best way to understand yourself is to face off against someone or something completely different. "Ready for the advanced class?" Jake asked ZKRT, nodding toward the special training area where a mixed group of beings was warming up. "Always," replied the crystalline diplomat, their form shifting into a perfect fighting stance. "Though I still don't understand why humans insist on shouting 'Let's go, champ' during intense training sessions." Some mysteries of combat sports, Jake said sagely, remain beyond even galactic understanding. Like any good combat sports promotion, the Universal Fighting Championship began with a serious marketing challenge. How do you promote fights to beings who experience time non-linearly? The answer is simple, Jake explained to his newly assembled promotional team. We market to everyone, all at once. And maybe we can get sponsored by that company that makes multi-dimensional energy drinks. The UFC, now rebranded as the Universal Fighting Championship, had grown from a curious experiment into the galaxy's hottest sporting phenomenon. Fight cards were broadcast across 17 dimensions, with weight classes ranging from quantum light to super hypergent. Pay-per-view numbers were through the roof, though accounting had a nervous breakdown trying to calculate buy rates across species that used different concepts of numbers. The merchandising department faced similar challenges. How do you design fight shirts for beings that exist as probability clouds? Keep it simple became Jake's mantra. Focus on the fundamentals. Like, don't let the telepathic fighters read the judges' minds during decisions, and always have a quantum containment field ready for the heavyweight division. The fight promotion's popularity led to some interesting developments. Celebrity fighters emerged from every corner of the galaxy. There was Kathax the Magnificent, a crystalline heavyweight known for his devastating spinning backfist. Princess Void, an energy being whose ground game defied several laws of physics. And of course, Human Bob from accounting, who became an unexpected fan favorite after winning 3 straight fights with nothing but basic wrestling and dad jokes. Marketing these diverse fighters required some creative approaches. Traditional trash talk needed careful translation to avoid interstellar incidents. One fighter's attempt at a promotional promo accidentally declared war on 3 star systems before the translation matrix could be adjusted. Remember, Jake coached his fighters during media training, keep the trash talk species neutral. And please, no more jokes about quantum superposition. The last time someone did that, half our audience existed and didn't exist simultaneously. The fight camps became legendary. Training centers across the galaxy adopted Earth's martial arts traditions, often with fascinating adaptations. A monastery on Proxima Centauri B became famous for its zero-gravity Brazilian jiu-jitsu program. A gas giant in the Orion sector hosted the galaxy's most intense Muay Thai conditioning camp, where fighters trained in 15G gravity. ZKRT, now the UFC's head of fighter relations, helped develop the official rulebook, a document that existed in 27 dimensions and had to be approved by the Galactic Council's Committee for Acceptable Forms of Recreational Violence. Section 47. Paragraph 12 ZKRT would often quote, "No fighter shall attempt to win by causing a localized heat death of the universe." This includes but is not limited to temporal paradox submissions and gravitational collapse techniques. The promotion's success led to an explosion of interstellar fight leagues. The Quantum Boxing Association gained popularity among energy beings. The Pan-Galactic Wrestling Federation attracted species who preferred their combat with more theatrical flair. There was even a dedicated league for silicon-based life forms called Rockium Socium robots, though Earth's lawyers had something to say about that name. But the UFC remained the premier organization, largely thanks to Jake's innate understanding of what made combat sports special. He knew it wasn't just about the fights, it was about the stories, the drama, and the universal appeal of watching beings test themselves against worthy opponents. Every fighter has a story, he explained during a press conference that was simultaneously occurring at all points in space-time. Our job is to tell those stories in a way that resonates across species, planets, and dimensional barriers. The fight cards became must-watch events across the galaxy. Commentary teams included traditional sports broadcasters alongside quantum physicists and xenobiologists, all working together to explain the technical aspects of interdimensional striking exchanges. And that's a beautiful phase shift counter by the challenger a typical commentary line might go. You don't often see that kind of temporal manipulation in the lightweight division, Joe. Even the ring girls got a progressive update, with the traditional role being filled by beings of all species, dimensions, and states of matter. Though they had to discontinue the practice of walking around with round cards after an incident involving a fourth-dimensional ring person and a temporary breakdown in causality. The sport's rapid growth didn't come without challenges. Weight cutting became particularly problematic when several fighters discovered they could temporarily exist as pure energy to make weight. The anti-doping agency had to establish guidelines for everything from quantum enhancement to psychological time dilation. But through it all, the UFC maintained its position as the galaxy's premier combat sports organization. Jake's original vision of beings from across the universe coming together to engage in structured, respectful competition had become a reality beyond even his wildest PR pitches. "You know what the best part is," he said to ZKRT during their final prep for the upcoming Intergalactic Championship event. "We're not just promoting fights anymore, we're promoting understanding." "That sounds like something from our marketing materials," ZKRT observed. "Yeah," Jake admitted, watching a holographic preview of the upcoming fight card. "But sometimes the best PR is 1 year after first contact. The Universal Fighting Championship was preparing for its biggest event yet, UFC Infinity, to be held in the same Las Vegas arena where it all began. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Though explaining the concept of symbolism to a hive mind of quantum particles had taken several hours. Full circle, Jake mused, standing in the transformed arena. Though I suppose that phrase doesn't mean much to species that exist in non-linear geometries. The venue had been extensively modified to accommodate fighters and spectators from across the galaxy. The original octagon was now a multi-dimensional combat space that looked different depending on which plane of existence you viewed it from. The cheap seats extended into several alternate dimensions, and the VIP section included both a zero-gravity box and a chamber of pure thought for non-corporeal beings. Ticket sales are exceeding projections in all known timelines, reported ZKRT, whose crystalline form now sported a black belt in 3 martial arts and a promoter's license in 17 star systems. Though we're still having issues with beings from the quantum realm trying to attend in multiple probability states to avoid paying full price. The fight card was a testament to how far they'd come. The preliminary bouts featured promising newcomers from across the galaxy, including a particularly impressive matchup between a temporal specialist from the Crab Nebula and a human prospect known for his old-school wrestling approach. "Just like old times," Jake said, watching the final preparations. "Except now we have to worry about fighters accidentally creating synthetic universes during their warm-ups." The co-main event featured ZKRT themselves, facing off against a human black belt in what was being billed as the battle of the original species. The marketing team had wanted to call it Crystal vs. Meet the Reckoning, but Jake had vetoed that one personally. But it was the main event that really captured the spirit of what the Universal Fighting Championship had become. In one corner, Kathax the Magnificent, the crystalline heavyweight who'd become famous for mastering human martial arts. In the other, Maria the Supernova Rodriguez, a human fighter who'd adapted her style to counter non-corporeal opponents. Remember, Jake briefed the referees before the event. Standard rules apply. No temporal manipulation after the bell, no spontaneous evolution, and absolutely no creating singularities, accidental or otherwise. We're still paying for the cleanup from last time. As the arena filled with beings from across the known universe, Jake found himself standing in almost exactly the same spot where he'd first encountered Ambassador Glex 1 year ago. The ambassador was there too, now sporting official UFC merchandise adapted for their non-corporeal form. "I must admit," Glex said, their translator now perfectly calibrated for casual conversation, "when we first arrived we thought we'd discovered humanity's greatest flaw. Instead, we found one of your species' most remarkable achievements. The art of regulated violence," Jake suggested. "The ability to turn conflict into connection," Glex corrected. "Though your marketing department's version does sound better." The event began with a ceremony that would have been impossible to imagine a year ago. Fighters from across the galaxy demonstrated their arts in perfect harmony, human boxing flowing into quantum combat forms, zero-gravity grappling transitioning seamlessly into temporal strike patterns. As Jake watched Kathax and Rodriguez touch gloves or crystal appendage to glove, to be precise before their historic main event, he couldn't help but smile. The universe had finally understood why Earth was the only planet with combat sports championships, because someone had to go first, to show that the best way to understand your fellow beings sometimes involved a good, clean fight. "Ladies, gentlemen, sentient beings, and quantum probability clouds," the announcer's voice echoed through all known dimensions of the arena. "Are you ready?" The roar of the crowd transcended species, language, and the laws of physics themselves. In that moment, watching a human and a crystalline being prepare to engage in regulated combat for the entertainment of the galaxy, Jake realized that humanity's peculiar love of fighting had actually helped create something beautiful. You know what he said to no one in particular. I think we might need a bigger octagon. And somewhere in the crowd, a young being of pure energy was watching their first fight, dreaming of one day stepping into the multi-dimensional combat space themselves. Because some things, it turns out, are truly universal. The only question now ZKR team used is whether we should tell them about professional wrestling. Jake adjusted his tie, already thinking about the marketing possibilities. One combat sport at a time, my friend. One combat sport at a time. Just the truth.